Have you ever heard of a pilot so skilled that enemies refused to believe the reports? A warrior whose very existence challenged everything the military establishment thought they knew about courage, capability, and the art of aerial combat? This is the story of Lieutenant Sarah Redfeather, a Lakota woman who became one of the most decorated and controversial pilots of an alternate World War II. What you're about to hear sounds impossible. The military tried to bury it. Historians debated it. But the evidence, hidden in classified files for 70 years, tells a story that defies belief. Spring 1943. The war in the Atlantic had reached a turning point. German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes, but a new threat had emerged. One that Allied command had not anticipated. A rogue Polish naval contingent, influenced by extremist elements and armed with captured German vessels, had begun attacking American supply convoys bound for Britain. The reasons remain murky to this day, lost in the fog of wartime chaos and political intrigue. What matters is this: American ships were sinking, and someone had to stop them. The Army Air Corps faced a crisis. Their best pilots were deployed in Europe and the Pacific. Training new crews took months. Losses were mounting. Then, from an unlikely corner of Montana, came a name that would change everything. Sarah Redfeather had learned to fly at 16, barnstorming across the Dakotas with her father, a veteran of the Great War who had been denied entry to the Army Air Service because of his heritage. He taught his daughter everything he knew about aircraft, about reading the wind, about becoming one with the machine. By 1942, she could fly anything with wings. When the Women Air Force Service Pilots program began, Sarah was among the first to volunteer. She excelled in every test, outperforming men who had twice her flight hours. But there was resistance. Officers whispered that she was too small, too inexperienced, too female, too Indian. They found every excuse to keep her in transport duty, ferrying trainers from factory to base. She had never touched a B-25 Mitchell bomber. The twin-engine medium bomber was a beast, over 50 feet long, weighing 19,000 pounds empty, capable of carrying 3,000 pounds of bombs. It required strength, precision, and nerves of steel. Military doctrine said women weren't physically capable of handling such aircraft in combat conditions. Native women, some officers muttered, even less so. But war has a way of breaking rules when necessity demands it. Captain James Morrison was a bomber squadron commander stationed at Naval Air Station Norfolk. He had lost 3 crews in 2 weeks to the rogue Polish ships, which operated with shocking coordination and firepower. His superiors demanded results. His men were exhausted, traumatized, angry. He needed a miracle. The miracle arrived on a cold March morning in the form of a 5'4" Lakota woman with braided black hair and eyes that had seen too much prairie sky to fear anything man-made. Sarah had been ferrying a B-25 from the factory in Kansas City to Norfolk when she overheard radio chatter about the Polish threat. She landed, walked into Morrison's office without an appointment, and said 7 words that would echo through military history. "Give me a bomber, and I'll end this." Morrison's first instinct was to laugh. His second was to have her removed. His third, born of desperation and a flash of intuition, was to listen. She laid out a plan with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life proving doubters wrong. The Polish ships operated in wolf packs, she explained, coordinating their movements to maximize defensive coverage. Standard bombing runs came in high and level, giving anti-aircraft gunners plenty of time to track and fire. The attacks were predictable, and the ships had learned to exploit that predictability. Sarah proposed something different, something dangerous, something that required a kind of flying that barely qualified as sane. She would go in alone, at wave-top level, using the ocean itself as cover. She would come at them from the direction of the rising sun, using the glare to mask her approach. And she would strike not with precision bombing, but with skip bombing, a technique so risky that even experienced pilots avoided it. The bomber would skim 15 feet above the water at full speed, release bombs that would skip across the surface like stones on a pond, and strike the ships below the waterline, where armor was weakest. Morrison studied her for a long moment. He saw in her eyes something he recognized from his own reflection after too many missions, too many lost friends. Determination that bordered on fury, skill that demanded to be tested, and something else, something harder to define, a kind of ancestral certainty, as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "You understand," he said slowly, "that this is suicide." "You understand," she replied, "that I'm going anyway." He gave her the bomber. The crew was another matter. No one wanted to fly with her. The bombardier assigned to her plane requested a transfer. The navigator claimed illness. The gunners made excuses. In the end, she went up with a skeleton crew, a young radio man named Tommy Chen, fresh from training, who hadn't been around long enough to absorb the base's prejudices, and a veteran tail gunner named Marcus Webb, who figured he was going to die anyway and might as well go out with a good story. They launched before dawn on March 23, 1943. Intelligence had located a Polish wolf pack operating 200 miles east of the Virginia coast. 5 destroyers, moving in formation, hunting for convoys. Sarah pushed the B-25 low, so low that spray from the waves kissed the bomber's belly. Tommy Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, nervous, asking if they should gain altitude. She didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. She had entered a state her father had taught her about, a place where thought dissolved and instinct took over. The Lakota called it being in harmony with the spirit of the hunt. The sun rose ahead of them, painting the ocean gold and crimson. Sarah adjusted her course, positioning the bomber so that anyone looking west would be staring directly into the blinding light. The Polish ships never saw them coming. The first destroyer appeared as a dark shape against the morning glare. Sarah's hand moved on the controls with fluid precision. The bomber dropped even lower, skimming so close to the water that Marcus Webb, in the tail, could see individual waves. At 300 yards, traveling at 230 miles per hour, she released the first bomb. It left the bay, struck the water at a shallow angle, and skipped. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it slammed into the destroyer's hull below the waterline and detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. Water and steel erupted skyward. The ship listed immediately, taking on water through a hole the size of a truck. Sarah didn't wait to watch it sink. She was already banking hard, coming around for the second pass. The Polish crews were scrambling now, anti-aircraft guns swiveling, trying to track a target that moved like a hawk hunting rabbits. But Sarah was inside their defensive envelope, too low and too fast for the guns to depress far enough. She made pass after pass, each one perfect, each bomb finding its mark. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, 3 destroyers were sinking and 2 more were dead in the water, listing badly, their crews abandoning ship. Sarah pulled the bomber up, gained altitude, and turned for home. The entire engagement had lasted 17 minutes. Tommy Chen's voice over the intercom was shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. Did that really happen? Marcus Webb, who had flown 37 missions over Germany, who had seen things that gave him nightmares, who thought nothing could surprise him anymore, simply said, Holy hell. Back at Norfolk, Morrison was on the radio with Atlantic Command, trying to explain what his patrol aircraft were reporting. 5 Polish ships destroyed or disabled. 1 B-25 bomber. 1 pilot. No losses. That's impossible, the admiral said. Yes, sir, Morrison replied. I thought so too. When Sarah landed, there was a crowd waiting on the tarmac. Word had spread. Men who had refused to fly with her now stood in silence as she climbed down from the cockpit, her flight suit soaked with sweat, her hands still steady on the ladder. Morrison approached, his face unreadable. For a moment, Sarah wondered if he was angry, if she had somehow violated protocol, if the success was going to be twisted into a reprimand because she hadn't followed procedure. Then he saluted her, crisply, formally, with genuine respect. Lieutenant Redfeather, he said, you just became the most dangerous pilot in the Atlantic. She saluted back. Sir, respectfully, I was always the most dangerous pilot in the Atlantic. You just didn't know it yet. A few men laughed. A few more joined in. And just like that, the ice broke. But this was only the beginning. The Polish rogue fleet, it turned out, was larger than intelligence had estimated. The 5 ships Sarah destroyed were just one wolf pack. There were others. And now they knew she was hunting them. The next mission came 36 hours later. The Polish ships had changed tactics, traveling in tighter formations, increasing their anti-aircraft coverage, posting lookouts with specific instructions to watch for low-altitude approaches from the east at dawn. They had studied her. Now she had to adapt. Sarah requested a night mission. Morrison hesitated. Night flying in a B-25 over the open ocean, without modern navigation equipment, was dangerous even for the most experienced crews. For a pilot on her 3rd combat sortie, it was borderline reckless. They're expecting me at dawn, Sarah said, so I'll come at midnight. She went up with a full crew this time. Volunteers. Men who had seen what she could do and wanted to be part of history. The bombardier, a tough Texan named Bill Rourke, told her, I don't care what anyone says. You're the real deal. The mission was everything Morrison feared, and more. Cloud cover obscured the stars. Rain battered the windscreen. Navigation was a nightmare of dead reckoning and prayer. But Sarah flew as if she could see in the dark, as if the night was her natural element. They found the Polish ships by following the sound of their engines, a low rumble that carried across the water. Sarah killed her own engines, gliding in silent, a predator in the darkness. The bombs fell without warning. The first ship exploded before its crew even knew they were under attack. The second ship fired blindly into the darkness, tracers arcing uselessly into empty sky, while Sarah circled back, lined up another approach, and struck again. The third ship tried to run, pushing its engines to maximum, but it couldn't outrun fate. By the time the sun rose, 3 more Polish ships had joined their sisters at the bottom of the Atlantic. Sarah landed with her fuel gauge reading empty, the engines coughing as she touched down. 8 ships in 2 days. 15 enemy vessels destroyed in less than 48 hours. The military establishment didn't know what to do with her. She was a propaganda dream and a political nightmare. Promoting her meant admitting that they had been wrong about women in combat, wrong about Native Americans in leadership roles, wrong about who could be a warrior. Ignoring her meant looking foolish in the face of undeniable success. Compromise came in the form of a medal ceremony with no press coverage and a promotion that came with an asterisk. Lieutenant Redfeather was decorated for valor, then quietly reassigned to training duty. She was too dangerous to use and too valuable to waste, so they put her in limbo. But Sarah Redfeather had tasted combat and found something there that satisfied a hunger she hadn't known she carried. The sky had always been her home, but now she understood that some people were born to fight in it, to dance with death at 200 miles per hour, to prove that courage had no gender and skill had no color. The war would need her again, sooner than anyone expected, and when it did, she would be ready. Because the Polish rogue fleet had been destroyed? Yes, but the forces that created it, the shadowy networks of extremists and opportunists who saw the war as a chance to settle old scores and seize power, those forces were still out there, growing, planning, and they had learned her name. The medals sat in a drawer in Sarah's quarters at Randolph Field, Texas, where they had transferred her to train new pilots. Bronze Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. She never wore them. They felt like apologies disguised as honors, compensation for being removed from the fight she had proven she could win. Training duty was a special kind of torture for someone who had tasted real combat. Day after day, she took nervous cadets up in training aircraft, teaching them basic maneuvers they should have learned months earlier. Some were talented, most were mediocre. A few were dangerous to themselves and others. None of them understood what war really meant, what it felt like to see a ship explode beneath your wings, to know that men were dying because of decisions you made in fractions of seconds. The other instructors treated her with careful politeness that somehow felt worse than open hostility. They called her Lieutenant Redfeather, asked her technical questions, deferred to her expertise on skip bombing techniques, but they never invited her to the officers' club, never included her in their card games, never asked about her missions. She existed in a bubble of respectful isolation, acknowledged but never accepted. Tommy Chen, her radio man from those 2 legendary days, wrote her letters from his new posting in North Africa. His handwriting was terrible, his grammar worse, but his loyalty was absolute. "They talk about you here," he wrote in one letter. "Some guys don't believe it really happened. I show them the mission reports. I tell them I was there. They still don't believe it. How can someone do something so impossible that even the witnesses doubt their own memories?" Marcus Webb, the tail gunner, had been less fortunate. He had flown 3 more missions with other crews before his bomber went down over the North Atlantic. He survived the crash, spent 18 hours in a life raft, and was picked up by a destroyer. The cold water had destroyed his lungs. He was medically discharged, sent home to Alabama with a Purple Heart and a cough that would kill him before his 40th birthday. Sarah received a letter from his sister, thanking her for giving Marcus the best day of his life. The letter made her cry, which she almost never did. Captain Morrison, promoted to major and given command of a bomber wing in England, sent her tactical manuals and reports from the European theater. No personal messages, just professional correspondence, as if they were colleagues debating aircraft specifications. But Sarah understood what he was really saying. "I haven't forgotten. You belong in this war. I'm trying to bring you back." Months passed. Summer turned to fall. 1943 became 1944. The war ground on, consuming young men by the thousands. Sarah taught cadets, filed reports, and felt a part of herself dying from disuse. Then, in February of 1944, everything changed. The call came at 0300 hours, jarring her from dreams of flight. Colonel Richard Hawthorne's voice on the phone was clipped, urgent, stripped of the usual military formality. "Lieutenant Redfeather, you're needed in Washington immediately. A car will arrive in 20 minutes. Pack for an extended deployment. Tell no one where you're going." "Sir, what's this about?" "Not on this line. Be ready." The car was a black Packard sedan with government plates, and a driver who spoke not a single word during the 8-hour journey to the capital. They drove through the night and into the gray dawn, passing through 3 military checkpoints, each guard examining credentials with increasing scrutiny. Sarah tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. They arrived at the Pentagon just after noon. The building was less than 2 years old, already a monument to American military might and bureaucratic expansion. The driver led her through corridors that seemed to multiply like a maze, past offices with closed doors, and serious-looking men carrying folders marked Top Secret. Finally, they reached a conference room in the building's interior, a windowless space with maps covering every wall. 7 men waited inside. She recognized 2. Major Morrison, looking older and graver than she remembered, and Colonel Hawthorne, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses and the bearing of someone who had spent too many years making impossible decisions. The others were strangers, high-ranking officers whose insignia indicated positions far above her pay grade. A 2-star general sat at the head of the table, his face weathered and hard. "Lieutenant Redfeather," the general said without preamble, "I'm General Thomas Bradford, Office of Strategic Services. We have a situation that requires your particular talents. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. Disclosure would be considered treason. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. The Polish ships you destroyed last year were not the rogue operation we initially believed. They were part of a larger network, one that extends far beyond military targets. We've been tracking this organization for months. They call themselves the Black Sun Pact, a coalition of extremist elements from several nations who believe the Allied powers are fighting the wrong enemy. They want to prolong the war, create chaos, and seize power in the resulting vacuum." He nodded to an aide, who dimmed the lights and activated a projector. Images appeared on a screen. Grainy photographs of men in dark uniforms, documents covered in cryptic symbols, maps with red circles marking locations across the Atlantic seaboard. "3 weeks ago," Bradford continued, "we intercepted communications indicating that the Pact has acquired something that could change the entire course of the war, a weapon. We don't know the details yet, but our intelligence suggests it's chemical or biological in nature, possibly derived from captured German research. They plan to deploy it against an American city. We don't know which city, and we don't know when, but the time frame is measured in weeks, not months." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "Where do I fit into this, sir?" "The Pact's leadership operates from a converted merchant vessel, the Falkenhorst, currently hiding somewhere in the North Atlantic. Standard naval operations can't find it. They're using weather patterns, submarine escorts, and extraordinary operational security. Every time we get close, they vanish. We've lost 2 destroyers trying to hunt them down. We need someone who can operate independently, who can find them, engage them, and destroy that weapon before they can deploy it. You want me to sink a ship that the entire Atlantic Fleet can't locate? No, Lieutenant. We want you to do something much harder." Another aide stepped forward, placing a new folder on the table in front of her. Sarah opened it. The documents inside detailed a modified B-25, redesigned for extreme long-range operations, extra fuel tanks, advanced radio equipment, modified bomb bay capable of carrying specialized munitions, and something else, provisions for a crew of 7 instead of the usual 6. "We've assembled a team," Morrison said, speaking for the first time. "The best people I could find. People who understand what you can do and want to fly with you. But this won't be like the missions off Norfolk. You'll be operating 400 miles from land, in winter weather, with no backup and no rescue if something goes wrong. The odds of coming back are not good." Sarah studied the file, her mind already working through the tactical challenges. Finding one ship in thousands of square miles of ocean, identifying it correctly without air-to-ground communication, destroying not just the vessel, but the weapon aboard, which meant precision strikes, not area bombardment. Doing all of this while under fire from what the intelligence report suggested was a heavily armed target with experimental anti-aircraft systems. "Who's on the crew?" she asked. Morrison slid another file across the table. Sarah opened it and saw faces she knew. Tommy Chen recovered from a minor wound and volunteered the instant he heard she was flying again. A bombardier named Susan Park, one of the handful of Asian American women in military service who had scored perfect marks in every training exercise. A navigator, Lieutenant James Blackwood, Navajo, with a gift for dead reckoning that bordered on supernatural. 2 gunners, both combat veterans from the Pacific Theater. And a flight engineer, a grizzled warrant officer named Frank Kowalski, who had kept bombers flying through mechanical nightmares that should have been fatal. "They all volunteered?" Sarah asked. "They fought for the assignment," Morrison said quietly. "Blackwood threatened to go AWOL if we didn't put him on your crew." Park said, and I quote, "I'm tired of being told what women can't do. Put me with someone who's already proving them wrong." Chen showed up at my office every day for a week until I relented. The others heard rumors and requested transfer. "You've become something of a legend, Lieutenant. People want to fly with you." Sarah closed the file and looked at the general. "When do we leave?" 72 hours. We have intelligence suggesting the Falkenhorst will be in a specific operational area 5 days from now. That's our window. Miss it, and we may not get another chance before they strike." "And if we fail?" Bradford's expression didn't change. "Then a lot of people are going to die, and history will record this war very differently than we hoped." The briefing continued for 3 more hours. Intelligence analysts presented everything they knew about the Black Sun Pact, which wasn't much. Fragmentary intercepts, decoded messages that raised more questions than answers. The organization drew members from Polish nationalist groups, yes, but also German expatriates, disaffected American isolationists, and what appeared to be occultist societies that believed the war was fulfilling ancient prophecies. Their ideology was a toxic mixture of nationalism, mysticism, and apocalyptic fervor. The weapon itself remained mysterious. One intercepted message referred to it as the breath of the old gods. Another called it the perfected strain. A third, more troubling still, suggested that exposure would cause symptoms within hours and death within days, with no known cure. Chemical weapons were horror enough, but this sounded like something worse, something that could spread. "Bioweapon," Sarah said flatly. "You think they've created a plague?" "We think they might have found one," Bradford admitted. German researchers were exploring military applications of infectious diseases. Most of their work was theoretical, thank God. But if someone recovered their research, had the right resources and expertise, and lacked any moral restraints— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sarah met with her crew that evening at a secure hangar outside Washington. The modified B-25 sat under harsh electric lights, its metal skin gleaming, looking both familiar and alien with its modifications. Tommy Chen spotted her first and broke into a grin so wide it threatened to split his face. "Lieutenant, I knew you'd be flying again. I told everyone. They didn't believe me. But I knew." Tommy. She shook his hand, felt the strength in his grip, the calluses from hours on radio equipment. You didn't have to volunteer for this. Yes, I did. We're a crew. That matters. Susan Park was smaller than Sarah, which was saying something, with short black hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her an academic look until you noticed the intensity in her eyes. Lieutenant Redfeather, I've studied your skip-bombing runs, the angles you used, the speeds, the timing. It shouldn't be possible. I want to learn how you did it. Instinct, Sarah said, and luck. I don't believe in luck. I believe in skill. Teach me. James Blackwood stood apart from the others, studying a navigation chart spread across a workbench. He was tall, lean, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years outdoors. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes met Sarah's with an understanding that transcended words. He spoke in Navajo, a greeting that acknowledged their shared heritage without making it the defining fact of who they were. Sarah responded in Lakota, and, for a moment, they were not military personnel in an Army Air Corps hangar, but representatives of nations older than the one they now served. They told me you navigate by feel, Sarah said in English. My grandfather taught me to read the stars, the wind, the way birds fly. Same principles work at 20,000 feet. Maybe better. Up there, you're closer to the truth of things. The gunners, Rodriguez and O'Brien, were cut from different cloth but shared the same combat-hardened competence. Rodriguez was from Texas, soft-spoken and deadly accurate. O'Brien was Boston Irish, loud and profane and utterly reliable. They had flown together in the Pacific, survived crashes and fighters and flak that should have killed them. We heard stories about you, ma'am, Rodriguez said. Figured most of it was bullshit. Then we read the actual mission reports. Naval intelligence doesn't lie in official documents. Those reports were classified, Sarah said. O'Brien grinned. Yeah, well, turns out Morrison's got friends who owe him favors. He wanted us to know what we were signing up for. Seemed fair. Frank Kowalski, the flight engineer, was 52 years old and had forgotten more about aircraft maintenance than most mechanics ever learned. He had thick hands scarred from years of working with hot metal and sharp edges, and he spoke with the blunt authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of keeping birds in the air when they had no right to fly. This plane's been modified 6 ways from Sunday, he told Sarah as they inspected the bomber together. Extra fuel capacity means we're carrying more weight, structural reinforcements to handle the stress, new radio gear that's supposed to work in conditions that would scramble normal equipment, and these. He gestured to the bomb bay, where specialized munitions waited in their cradles. Incendiary clusters, not your standard payload. They're designed to burn hot enough to destroy biological material. Naval intelligence thinks if we hit the right target, we can neutralize the weapon even if we don't sink the ship immediately. If we hit the right target, Sarah repeated. That's a big if, when we don't even know what the ship looks like. Intelligence has some ideas. Converted merchant vessel, probably German-built, with modifications for long-range operation and heavy weapons. Should stand out if we can get close enough to identify it. And if we can't? Kowalski's expression was grim. Then we make our best guess and hope we're right. Not exactly precision tactics, but we're dealing with an invisible enemy and a ticking clock. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut. The next 72 hours were a blur of preparation. Flight tests with the modified bomber, learning its quirks and capabilities, briefings on the operational area, memorizing topographical features of the ocean that seemed to have no features, weapons training with the incendiary clusters, understanding blast radii and optimal release altitudes, emergency procedures for ditching in the North Atlantic, which everyone knew was a polite fiction. If they went down in winter water 400 miles from shore, they had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia killed them. Sarah spent hours with Blackwood, reviewing navigation charts by lamplight, plotting courses that accounted for wind patterns, fuel consumption, and the probability of enemy contact. He worked with slide rules and protractors, calculating angles with a precision that seemed almost ritualistic. "My grandfather was a code talker in the First War," Blackwood said during one late-night session. "Never got recognition for it. They used our language because it was unbreakable, then pretended we didn't exist once the fighting stopped. He told me that our people have always been warriors. The uniform doesn't change that. It just gives us different enemies to fight." "Do you think this is our war?" Sarah asked. "Really ours? Or are we just fighting for people who see us as tools?" "Both can be true. The men who put us here don't care about justice or recognition. They care about winning. But the people we're protecting, the cities that weapon could destroy, they're full of innocents who don't deserve to die for politics they don't understand. We're not fighting for the government. We're fighting for them. That makes it our war." Susan Park was equally philosophical, but from a different angle. "My parents were immigrants," she told Sarah while they practiced target calculations in the navigator's dome. "Came through Angel Island, worked in canneries in California, saved every penny to send me to college. When the war started, some people looked at us differently, like we might be the enemy because of how we looked. But I'm as American as anyone born here. More, maybe, because my family chose this country. We fought to belong. Now I'm fighting to prove we do." The crew gelled with surprising speed. There was no hazing, no testing period where the new pilot had to prove herself. Sarah's reputation had preceded her, and, more importantly, the magnitude of the mission left no room for petty rivalries. They were 7 people volunteering for what might be a suicide run, united by skill, determination, and a shared understanding that sometimes history demands everything from those capable of giving it. On the morning of departure, General Bradford visited the hangar one final time. He looked older than he had 3 days earlier, the weight of command visible in every line of his face. "The latest intelligence puts the Falkenhorst in grid sector 7 Alpha, approximately 400 miles northeast of Newfoundland. Weather will be terrible. Storms moving through the area, visibility near zero, waves high enough to make skip bombing essentially impossible. If we're wrong about the timing or the location, you'll be flying through hell for nothing." "And if you're right," Sarah asked, "then you'll be flying through hell to save thousands of lives. Maybe more. We've identified 12 American cities with major ports as potential targets. The weapon's deployment mechanism is unknown, but prevailing theory suggests aerosol dispersal from low-flying aircraft or ship-based sprayers. Any coastal city is vulnerable. New York, Boston, Charleston, San Francisco. Millions of people who have no idea how close they are to catastrophe." The weight of it settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical thing. 15 ships had been impressive. This was something else entirely. This was being handed responsibility for preventing an atrocity that could reshape the war and scar the nation for generations. "We'll find them," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "I know you will. That's why you're going." They took off at 1400 hours under gray skies that promised nothing good. The modified B-25 lifted heavily, groaning under the weight of extra fuel and specialized munitions. Sarah coaxed it into the air with gentle hands, feeling the aircraft's reluctance, its desire to stay grounded where it was safe. Once airborne, she turned northeast and climbed to 8,000 feet, above the worst of the weather but below the altitude where ice would form on the wings and drag them down. Tommy Chen's voice came through the intercom, steady and professional, confirming radio frequencies and checking equipment. Susan Parks settled into the bombardier's position, running calculations. Blackwood hunched over his navigation table, plotting their course with instruments and intuition. The first 4 hours were uneventful, just the steady drone of engines and the vast emptiness of sky and sea. They passed over fishing boats, a convoy heading to Britain, a pod of whales that Rodriguez spotted from the waist gun position. The ocean stretched in all directions, gray and cold and infinite. Then the weather hit. It came like a wall, a front of churning clouds and sheeting rain that reduced visibility to nothing. The bomber shook and bucked, caught in turbulence that threw it sideways and made the engines scream. Sarah fought the controls, her arms burning with effort, her feet working the rudder pedals constantly to maintain heading. Lightning flashed, turning the world white for instants at a time, revealing nothing but more clouds, more rain, more chaos. "Jesus Christ," O'Brien muttered over the intercom. "This is worse than anything over the Pacific." "Stay focused," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was hammering. "Blackwood, can you keep us on course?" "Working on it," the navigator replied, his voice strained. "The winds are pushing us east, compensating, but it's like navigating through a hurricane." "Because we are," Kowalski called from the flight engineer's station. "This storm system shouldn't exist this time of year. Either we're incredibly unlucky, or someone's been reading the same weather reports we have and knew we'd be coming." The implications of that were troubling. If the Falkenhorst knew they were being hunted, they might have prepared an ambush. Or they might have relocated, making this entire mission a waste of fuel and time they didn't have. 3 more hours through the storm. Sarah's arms ached. Her eyes burned from staring into the gray void beyond the windscreen. The aircraft had picked up ice despite the altitude, adding weight and reducing efficiency. Fuel consumption was higher than projected. They would have barely enough to make it back to Newfoundland if they turned around now. "Contact!" Rodriguez's voice sharp over the intercom. 3 o'clock low. Vessel on the surface. Can't make out details, but it's big. Sarah banked right, descending through the clouds, breaking into clear air below the storm ceiling. And there it was. The ship was exactly as intelligence had described. A converted merchant vessel, maybe 400 feet long, with a cargo configuration that had been modified for military purposes. Gun emplacements lined the deck. What looked like launch tubes were visible midship. And most telling, the vessel flew no flag, no national identification, nothing that would mark it as belonging to any legitimate navy. "Is that it?" Tommy Chen asked, his voice tight. "Susan, can you confirm?" Sarah called to the bombardier. Park studied the ship through her optics, consulting the recognition guides they'd memorized. "Profile matches, size matches. Those launch tubes could be for the aerosol deployment system. I'm 90% confident this is our target." 90% isn't 100, Sarah said. "Nothing in this war is 100%. We make the best call we can with the information we have." Sarah thought of the 12 cities, the millions of people, the weapon that could turn population centers into graveyards. She thought of the men who had dismissed her as incapable, the system that had tried to sideline her, the moment when she had proven them wrong. She thought of her father, teaching her to fly, telling her that warriors were defined not by their gender or their heritage, but by their courage when the moment came. This was the moment. All crew, prepare for attack run. Susan, get ready on the bombs. Tommy, jam any radio signals from that ship. I don't want them calling for help. Rodriguez, O'Brien, you see fighters. You call them out immediately. No fighters visible, Rodriguez reported. But there's something weird about this. No escorts, no air cover, no defensive formations. Either they're incredibly confident or incredibly stupid. Or it's a trap, Blackwood said quietly. Sarah had already considered that possibility. Bait ship, draw in the hunters, then spring an ambush from concealed submarines or aircraft lurking in the clouds. It was exactly what she would do if she were the enemy commander. But they were here, the target was below, and time was running out. Sometimes you had to push forward even when instinct screamed caution. She dove. The bomber screamed toward the ocean, engines howling, the airframe shuddering from the stress. 5,000 feet. 3,000. 1,000. Sarah pulled up hard at 500 feet, leveling off, skimming toward the ship at full speed. The waves below were massive, 20-foot swells that made skip bombing almost impossible. Almost. The ship's guns opened fire. Tracers arced through the air, bright against the gray sky. Sarah jinked left, then right, her movements fluid and instinctive. The bullets passed behind them, the gunners unable to track a target moving this fast, this low. "Bombs away!" Susan called. The bomber lifted as weight released from the bay. Sarah didn't watch the bombs fall. She was already banking hard, climbing, preparing for the second pass. Behind them, the incendiaries hit. Fire blossomed on the ship's deck, white-hot flames that burned with chemical intensity. Direct hit, O'Brien confirmed. Midship section burning, but the ship's still moving. We need another pass. Sarah came around, lined up the approach, dove again. This time the ship's gunners were ready. The tracers came closer, much closer. Sarah felt the bomber shudder as rounds punched through the fuselage. "We're hit," Kowalski called. Number 2 engine taking damage. Still running, but losing oil pressure. "Can it hold?" "For now, but we can't take many more hits." Susan released the second wave of incendiaries. More fire, more destruction. The ship was burning now, flames consuming the deck, spreading to the interior. Sarah could see figures moving frantically, trying to extinguish the inferno. "That's got to be enough," Tommy Chen said. But Sarah wasn't sure. If the weapon survived, if it was in a sealed container or a protected hold, the fire might not destroy it. They needed to be certain. "One more pass," she decided. "Lieutenant, the engine," Kowalski started. "I know. One more pass, then we head home." She took them in low and fast, so low that the bomber's belly almost touched the wave crests. The ship was a floating funeral pyre now, but its guns were still firing. Desperate shots from crews who knew they were dying but refused to surrender. Something changed in the air. A shimmer, like heat haze, but wrong, unnatural. Sarah's instincts screamed warning. She banked hard left, just as the shimmer exploded into a visible field of energy, some kind of electromagnetic pulse that lit up the sky. "What the hell was that?" O'Brien yelled. Every instrument in the bomber went dark. The radios died. The navigation equipment failed. Even the engine gauges flickered and went dead. They were flying blind, relying only on Sarah's skill and the fact that the engines, mercifully, were still running. "Experimental weapon," Blackwood said grimly. "They tried to knock us out of the sky electronically." "Did it work?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. We're still flying, so no, but we've lost all navigation gear. I'm going to have to do this old school. Sarah didn't have time to worry about that now. She completed the attack run, released the last of their ordnance, and pulled up hard. Behind them, the ship exploded. Not just burned, but exploded. A massive detonation that sent a column of fire and smoke 1,000 feet into the air. "Secondary explosions," Susan reported, her voice shaking. "That wasn't just fuel. Something else went up. Maybe ammunition, maybe—" "The weapon," Sarah finished. "We destroyed it." They climbed back into the clouds, leaving the burning wreckage behind. The storm had lessened slightly, but navigation without instruments was a nightmare. Blackwood worked with compass, watch, and dead reckoning, calculating their heading by feel and experience. Sarah flew by instinct, trusting her sense of the aircraft, the wind, the subtle cues that separated experienced pilots from dead ones. The crippled number 2 engine finally gave up 90 minutes into the return flight. It seized with a grinding scream, the propeller freezing, adding drag that threatened to spiral them into the ocean. Kowalski managed to feather the prop, reducing the drag, but they were flying on one engine now, losing altitude slowly but steadily. "Can we make Newfoundland?" Sarah asked. Blackwood consulted his charts, did calculations in his head. "Maybe, if the winds are with us and the weather clears. If not—" He didn't need to finish. They all knew what happened to air crews who ditched in the North Atlantic in winter. Minutes, not hours. The miles crawled past. Fuel gauges, dead like everything else electronic, left them guessing at remaining range. Blackwood navigated by the sun when it occasionally broke through the clouds, by the angle of waves on the ocean below, by techniques his grandfather had taught him that predated aviation by centuries. "Land!" Rodriguez called. "Dead ahead. Rocky coastline." They had made it. Barely, but they had made it. The landing was rough. One engine, limited control, a crosswind that tried to flip them over at the last second. Sarah brought the bomber down on a coastal airstrip that was little more than a gravel runway carved from wilderness. The aircraft bounced once, twice, skidded sideways, and finally ground to a halt, with metal screaming and tires shredding. Silence. Blessed, beautiful silence. "Everyone alive?" Sarah asked. One by one, the crew called in, shaken, bruised, but alive. All 7 of them had survived. They climbed out of the bomber into cold air that tasted like freedom. Tommy Chen started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound born of relief and adrenaline crash. Susan Park sat on the wing, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't light a cigarette. Blackwood walked off into the wilderness for a few minutes, speaking prayers in Navajo to whoever might be listening. Sarah looked at the battered bomber, at the holes in its fuselage, at the dead engine, and the scorched metal from the electromagnetic pulse. They had been impossibly lucky. Skill alone shouldn't have been enough to bring them through. But luck and skill together, combined with courage and teamwork and desperation, had somehow been sufficient. A week later, they were back in Washington, standing in the same windowless conference room, facing General Bradford across the same table. This time, though, there were others present. Admirals, intelligence chiefs, people whose names Sarah would never know and whose roles were so classified they couldn't be discussed. "The ship is confirmed destroyed," Bradford said. "Naval Patrol found debris and bodies, all deceased from the fire or drowning. Chemical analysis of the wreckage detected traces of engineered pathogens, enough to confirm that the weapon was real and was aboard. Your attack destroyed it completely. The heat from those incendiaries burned hot enough to neutralize the biological agents. You saved lives, Lieutenant. Potentially hundreds of thousands. What about the rest of the pact? Sarah asked. Bradford's expression darkened. That's ongoing. The organization is larger than we initially believed, with cells operating in multiple countries. Taking down the Falkenhorst was a major blow, but it's not over. We're still hunting the leadership, still tracking their funding sources and connections. It's going to be a long fight. Then I should be part of it. You will be, but not the way you expect. He slid a folder across the table. Sarah opened it and found orders. Not reassignment orders, promotion orders. She was being promoted to captain and given command of a new unit, a specialized tactical air group designed for high-risk missions against unconventional targets. You've proven that there are threats conventional forces can't handle effectively, Bradford continued. We need flexibility, innovation, people who can think outside traditional military doctrine. You and your crew represent a new way of fighting. We're making it official. Sarah looked at the promotion papers, at the description of the new unit, at the resources and authority being placed in her hands. It was everything she had fought for and more. But there was something else in the folder. A photograph. A man's face, European features, cold eyes, standing on the deck of what looked like another ship. The caption read, Viktor Stanislav, Black Sun Pact Commander. Current whereabouts unknown. There's always another mission, Sarah said quietly. Always, Bradford agreed. The question is whether you're ready for the next one. She thought of the burning ship, the desperate flight home, the way her crew had come together under impossible pressure and emerged stronger. She thought of her father, who had been denied the chance to serve as a pilot, but had passed his knowledge to her. She thought of all the people like her, like Tommy and James and Susan, who had been told they weren't capable, weren't suitable, weren't warrior material, and who had proven the doubters catastrophically wrong. I'm ready, she said, and deep in her bones, in the place where instinct lived, where the spirit of flight and the call to battle merged into something indefinable but absolutely certain, she knew it was true. The war wasn't over. New enemies waited beyond the horizon, but she had a crew she trusted, a mission she believed in, and the freedom to prove, over and over again, that courage and skill recognized no boundaries of gender or heritage or expectation. She was a warrior, a pilot, an American and a Lakota, and a woman and a symbol of what was possible when institutions finally, grudgingly, got out of the way and let the capable do what they had always been able to do. The sky belonged to those brave enough to claim it, and Sarah Redfeather had claimed it utterly, forever, without apology or hesitation. The story of her war was just beginning.